my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm talking about the books that I read in March. So a lot of the times when I do videos like this, I will group them according to star rating or maybe in the order I read them. But instead this month, what I'm going to do is group them according to genre, because I have a lot of middle grade books that I read for middle grade March. So that's going to be a huge portion of this wrap up. But I also have some other genres, so I'll just kind of have this split up into genres so you can skip around if there are certain sections you're not as interested in or whatever. I also had quite a few DNFs. So I said in my March TBR that my goal for middle grade March was to find some new favorites and not waste my time on books that just weren't doing it for me. So there were books that I DNF'd because I felt like they were genuinely not good, and then there are books that I DNF'd because I just felt like it wasn't the right time. I felt like I would enjoy them later. And then I also had some books that weren't middle grades at all they ended up DNFing, and I don't really want to talk about any of those. I just want to talk about the books that I did finish. So let's go ahead and hop into the middle grade, I guess. I'm going to include two middle grade in here that I actually read in February, but that I didn't talk about, because what I was going to try to do is I was going to try to read all the Newbery Honors and the book that won the Newbery in 2024. And let you know whether or not I thought the winner was actually the best of the bunch, that kind of a thing. I did a vlog for that last year and I really enjoyed it. And I was going to try to do it this year, but I was kind of not really enjoying some of the Newberys that I read. I DNF'd two of the honor books and then didn't really love the two that I finished in February. So I had started a vlog with my thoughts on those two books, but because I'm not actually doing that vlog, I don't have anywhere I've shared about these books, so I am going to share about them here. So the first one that I completed was Mexikid, and this is a graphic novel memoir about a boy named Pedro who has been born in the United States, but his parents immigrated there from Mexico with some of his older siblings. So he and several of his younger siblings were born in the United States, but the older bunch of kids were already born before they moved to the United States. So he kind of has this feeling of almost like, where do I belong? I'm kind of American, I'm kind of Mexican. The family then goes on a road trip to Mexico to bring Pedro's abuelo back with them because he can no longer live on his own. So most of this memoir is detailing their trip to Mexico and back. I thought that this was really fun. I thought it was fine overall. I didn't really know that I thought that it was Newbery honor worthy. Basically, it has a lot of humor in it, a lot of heart, and I really liked that. But the humor definitely felt like a junior high boy was writing this. And I know that that's who this is directed to, but there are so many jokes about bodily fluids. And I was just kind of like, okay, I get it. Okay, let's move on. So it was fun. It was fine. I just don't know if I thought it was Newbery worthy. The other one that I read, I actually actively disliked, and that's Elf Dog and Owlhead by M.T. Anderson, I think. And I liked the premise of this book. So there's these people who live under the mountain. They're kind of elf-like, and their dog ends up escaping and ends up with this family of this little boy. And it's happening during a pandemic. It doesn't say that it's COVID, but it's clearly supposed to be COVID. And he's doing like online school with his siblings, and they're trying to share their computer and try to get things done. And everything's just horrible. He's so lonely. And this little dog ends up coming in his life and ends up taking him to like these alternate kind of like magical dimensions where there are like villages of people who have owl heads. The rest of them is like a new normal human, but their heads are owl heads. So there was a lot of magical elements to it that were really, really interesting, but there were things like he steals this thing from the owl village shortly into the book, and it's something that it's like in a salt and pepper type shaker, and you can sprinkle it on things and it just causes things to grow rapidly. And so he's like, I'm gonna take this and it will help our garden at home, so that way we can get the food that we need and all that kind of stuff. And it goes awry, and it's like one chapter, and then we never hear about that again. And it was really, really interesting and really, really funny. And that happens throughout the book. So I felt like the entirety of the book felt very disjointed, and like nothing actually fit together all that well. And it was just like all over the place. And I couldn't figure out why on earth this was nominated for a Newbery. The only thing I can think of is that it represents time in a pandemic and how the three children in this family are dealing with the stress of that very differently. And I did think that they did that well, but that didn't really seem like the point of the book. I think the point of the book felt like the fantasy story, but the fantasy story was just so disjointed. The illustrations were really, really beautiful, I will say that. But I gave this one 2 stars. I'm like, why on earth was this considered one of the best things that children's literature could offer? Okay, moving on to actual middle grade March books that I read in middle grade March was Out of the Dust by Karen Hesse. This is the first one that I finished, and I really enjoyed this. I was kind of prepared to not like it because I heard that it's bleak and a little bit too bleak for children's literature. And I would say that this is probably not for the younger end of middle grade. It takes place during the Dust Bowl, and there's a 14-year-old girl who's growing up, and just a lot of things and a lot of hardship happens in this book. But I didn't think that it was bereft of hope. I think that especially the end had a lot of good things at the end, but I also felt like when they were in the middle of all the things and everything was really, really hard, there were moments of hope, and she found joy and solace in other people and in music because she loves the piano and different things like that. And it's written in free verse, so it was a very short read. It was very impactful. I thought it was beautiful. Gave it 4 stars. A reread for me this middle grade March was the book that I read with my in-person book club, and that is The Witch of Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Spear. And I really enjoyed this book. The first time I read this, probably like 4 or 5 years ago, pre-BookTube, and I really liked it, and I gave it 4 stars. And upon a reread, I actually bumped my rating up to 5 stars because I just felt like this was so well done. I thought that the historical elements were really well done, but there's just a lot of character growth for most of the characters in the story, not just our main protagonist. And I really, really loved that. So this is about a young girl who moves to the United States from the Barbados during Revolutionary War time period, well, like previous to Revolutionary War time period. And she's very different from everyone around her because she's been raised on like a sugarcane plantation, and she just struggles with feeling different, and she encounters people's attitudes towards other people in the town who are different because she ends up coming to her aunt and uncle because she no longer has a place to live because her grandfather has passed away. And so they're Puritans and could not be more different than our main character. And so there's just a lot of growth, a lot of realization that different doesn't mean bad, and not judging people based on what you've heard other people say about them. And just, yeah, there's just a lot of really interesting themes here, and it really lent itself well to discussion. I'm sure it would absolutely for middle graders. I think it's often something that is assigned in school, but I didn't read it until an adult, and neither did most of the other people that were in my book club. For a lot of them, this was a first time read, and we all enjoyed it. And that is so rare because we have a lot of people in our book club that have entirely different tastes, and we've only ever had one book before this one that everyone has loved. On my Patreon, every month I pick a book that has been suggested to me by a patron, and I do a spoiler vlog for it. And I wanted to do a middle grade for middle grade March, so I ended up doing Aru Shah in the End of Time, which was recommended to me by Stephanie. And this is a Rick Riordan Presents, which I didn't realize when I got it out from the library, but it really fits because it feels very much like Percy Jackson, but it deals with Indian and Hindu mythology and folklore and all that kind of stuff. It was really, really interesting because I didn't really know anything at all about that culture, specifically like the religious culture and stuff. And so it was really, really interesting, all of these different gods and different belief systems and different things. It was really interesting because when I got about halfway through this, I'm like, oh my gosh, Claire would love this. She read Percy Jackson last year and just adored it. So I passed it off to her, and we were kind of looking at some of the ways that this mythology actually has similarities to Greek mythology and ways that it's entirely different. And so that was really, really fun aspect of this as well. But it was just a really fun read. Another book I read for middle grade March is one that I borrowed from my friend Whitney Drew. She's an in real life friend and also has a BookTube channel, and this is her daughter's favorite book, or one of her favorite books, and I know Whitney read it last year and absolutely loved it as well, and that is My Diary from the Edge of the World by Jodi Lynn Anderson. And I really enjoyed this. The premise of this is so interesting. So we're following this girl who's writing in her journal, and she is the middle child in this family, and they live in the United States, but it's almost like an alternate history of the United States. So for example, it actually talks about them learning about the Civil War in school, and she finds out that the Civil War only lasted like 3 months because the Sasquatch came out of the mountains to fight on the side of the North because they hate slavery. So there's all these magical beings, like there's Sasquatches, there's witches, there's dragons, there's all these different things. There are like genies and stuff like that. There's so many different magical creatures and beings in this book, and so it feels very like a magical realism in a sort of way slash alternate history, and it's really, really interesting. So basically the way that people die in this world is that this cloud comes to their house and ends up like taking them up, and she has a really sickly younger brother that they all just absolutely dote on, and a cloud comes to their house and they know it's coming for the little brother, and so they want to save the little brother, and so they want to go to this other world and cross over into this other world where the cloud can't get him. So we're following their journey in this RV. There are moments of humor, there are moments of absolutely beautiful writing. It's so emotional as well, obviously, as you can tell from the description of the story. It deals with a lot of emotion and family relations as well. And oh my gosh, I really, really loved this. It was almost perfect for me. There was a side plot that happened involving the parents in the last probably quarter of this book that I thought was like really unnecessary and kind of bothered me, honestly, especially that it was in a middle grade book. And it just felt so unnecessary, and I knocked it down to like 4 stars from that. But when I started this book, it was everything that I was looking for in a middle grade, but some of the execution just didn't quite come through for me. My favorite middle grade that I read this month was The Labors of Hercules Beale by Gary D. Schmidt. I am a huge fan of The Wednesday Wars, and I'm actually currently rereading it with my daughter in school, and I just love it. I think it's like middle grade perfection. So when I found out that he had written The Labors of Hercules Beale, which feels very similar tonally to The Wednesday Wars, but The Wednesday Wars has a huge emphasis on Shakespeare and his works, and The Labors of Hercules Beale, as you might be able to tell from the title, deals with the labors of Hercules and Greek mythology. And so it's so good. It's about this young boy, and his parents have tragically died in a car wreck, and his brother was like living abroad and has to come home and take care of him and raise him. And it just really, it deals a lot with grief and loneliness and community, and it's just so exquisitely and perfectly done, and I think about it all the time, and I just loved it so much. And there's actually a character from the Wednesday Wars that ends up being Hercules Beale's teacher at this new school that he starts out going to, and I loved that crossover from the Wednesday Wars. The last middle grade that I finished during the month, I have one that I'm still not done with, so it'll be in April's wrap up. But the one that I finished, the last one I finished for middle grade March, is A Wish in the Dark by Christina Soontornvat. And if you watched any of my middle grade content last year, the last map maker that she wrote was a Newbery Honor, and it was the only book that I read for middle grade March last year that I actually liked. I had such a dud of a year last year with middle grade March, and I loved the last map maker, and I gave it 5 stars. So this is one of her previous books, and it was also a Newbery Honor. And I can't help thinking that this poor woman has just been robbed. She's been nominated for a Newbery like 3 times, and she's only gotten an honor. And everything I've read by her has just been really excellent. This is also set in Thai culture and in a fantasy world, a lot like The Last Mapmaker, but it's a totally different like fantasy world. It just has Thai elements because that is Christina Soontornvat's heritage. So it's really fun to see how she interweaves those things. But the thing that really drew me to this book was the fact that it's also a retelling of Les Miserables, which I absolutely loved the book and the musical. And so this is just really interesting. We follow 2 children. One is more the Jean Valjean character and one is more the Javert character. And it's so interesting to watch their growth and their plot as they're going through. I really, really enjoyed this book. But I can't quite give it 5 stars because it's not a book that I thought about when I wasn't reading it. I really enjoyed it when I was reading it, but I put it down and then I'd be like, oh yeah, I should pick that back up. So it wasn't compelling in the same way that The Last Mapmaker was for me, but the writing was exquisite. I thought the plotting was good, the pacing was good, the characters were so lovable, loved the fantasy elements. So it's like I want to give it 5 stars, but I can't because it just wasn't quite there for me, but it was still really solid. Moving on to fantasy, can you believe I only had one fantasy last month, and that was The Tropic of Serpents by Marie Brennan. This is book 2 in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series. I read book 1 with my in-person book club last year. Then my friend and I decided we wanted to continue on with it, but we were finishing the Stormlight Archive. So we finished that first, and then we picked up The Tropic of Serpents. I liked this. This follows the same character, Lady Trent, Isabella, and she is piggybacking off of the last book, so I don't want to share much about the last book. That would be spoilery, but this goes in kind of a different direction because she's someone that she's in this almost like Victorian era setting, but it's in a fantasy world, and she wants very badly to be a naturalist who studies dragons in a time where that's not really the acceptable thing to do. But she's gotten to the point where she is able to do that more in this book, so she goes off on an expedition to this other country that is far in the south. It's a very African feeling culture. And I had a lot of difficulty following what was going on in this book because there's a lot of different people groups, a lot of different religious traditions, the warring between the people groups, and a lot of different names of specific people. It was really difficult for me to keep all of that straight. The part of this book that I enjoyed the most was the middle section where she is staying with a tribe trying to catch a glimpse of dragons, but it's a long time before she ever sees any dragons. They don't play as much of a role in this book as I would have liked them to. I think they played, you saw them earlier, I guess, in A Natural History of Dragons, and it felt like there was more mystery surrounding them, and this one just didn't really have that. And then at the end, you know, there's some reveals that happen of like, oh, well, this is who's behind this, and this is the warring factor of this, and I was just kind of like, okay. I don't remember who any of these people groups are. It was really difficult to keep them straight. So I really liked my time with Isabella, and I want to continue on in this because I've talked to several people who have read the entire series, and they said that this was the weakest book for them. So we plan to continue on with book 3, but we didn't really enjoy this that much. I also read a horror book this month. So I read What Feasts at Night. So not only is this a horror, but it's a new release. Who even am I? Those are 2 things that I seem like I never read. But in February, you may remember that I read What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher, which was a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. So I absolutely loved it. Perfection in a book for me, like 5 stars. Loved it so much. And I found out that the week that I was reading What Moves the Dead, the newest book that is a sequel of that book was released. And so I read What Moves the Dead with Stephanie, and we both immediately put a hold on our library for What Feasts at Night. And the crazy thing is that it said for both of us, I think it was somewhere in the 8 to 12 week range that we were gonna have to wait for this book. And enough people passed on the book that we ended up getting it mid-March. So like, I think less than a month after we read What Moves the Dead. And our holds came in on the same weekend. So we read this together again, and it was enjoyable. It follows the same character, Alex Easton, after the events of What Moves the Dead, and now they're going back to their home, and there's some really sketchy things going on there. And it kind of follows the kind of traditional thing of like a boo hag. They call it something else in the book. I can't remember. That's actually like a European origin of that, but like a boo hag is more of like a Southern, I think like Cajun kind of folklore kind of thing. And so but it's similar. So it's like this creature that almost acts like a vampire, but instead they steal your breath. But that's what they feed off of. So that's kind of the what you're dealing with and what they're tackling here. And I thought the writing was beautiful. I thought the humor was really good and helped break up those horror elements really, really well. But I felt like it read like every horror movie I'd ever watched. It didn't have anything really special about it. It didn't have like the turn and the twist that What Moves the Dead did. And because it wasn't a retelling of something that I loved, it was just kind of fine. Like, it was good, I guess. I shouldn't say fine because it wasn't mediocre. I enjoyed it when I was reading it. It just didn't really stick with me, and I didn't feel like it had that same special quality that What Moves the Dead did. So I think I gave it 4 stars because I felt like it was really, really good. It was well written. It just, I don't know, it was missing something. I continued a couple of manga series this month. So I read volume 9 of Attack on Titan with Christy. And oh my gosh, this is one of my favorite volumes so far. Oh my gosh, the series is really well done. It does kind of toe the line for me because this is also horror, and horror is just not normally my jam, but this is a dystopian world. So it's not supernatural horror. It's just kind of grotesque at times in a way that I can still handle. But this one was definitely a little difficult in places for me. But we actually got some really interesting questions answered and more questions introduced, and there's so much in this world that's so mysterious, and I'm always just like wondering what is really going on here and who is really behind some of this stuff. Like, it was just really, really crazy and really interesting. And we got a different character's backstory. They do that frequently in these volumes, and it feels like you connect really well with the side characters, not just the ones who you would call the main characters. So really enjoyed it. I also read volume 3 of Kuma 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 Bear, and this is such a fun, this is so opposite of Attack on Titan. This is light and fluffy and funny and wholesome and just a really good palate cleanser. So I really enjoyed this one. I really like this whole concept of this girl being trapped in a video game and that all of her powers are coming from this bear suit that she's wearing. It's just so funny and so enjoyable. I have volume 4, so I'm continuing on with this as well. I have a nonfiction that I almost finished, so I'm going to include it here because I've already talked about it in a video, and that's With Christ in the School of Prayer by Andrew Murray. I did a video talking about 4 books on prayer that have changed my life and that I wanted to recommend, and I hadn't even finished this book, and I'm like, it's already changing my life, and it's just continuing to do so, and I just love this. I can't recommend it enough. It basically is all talking about prayer, but different teachings that Christ had on prayer. So it's Christ is our teacher, and it is the school of prayer, and it's so good. It's a classic Christian, but super accessibly written. I don't think the language is difficult at all, so highly recommend this one. I had some classics that I finished this month as well. So I read, this is like, I'm using an envelope as a bookmark. I read several of the short stories of Willa Cather's 5 stories. I read 2 of those with Dia, and I really liked the first one we read. It was so good. The Enchanted Bluff, which is about this enchanted bluff that these childhood boys learn of and they're dreaming of exploring someday, and it's just so beautifully written and about like childhood dreams, and just her nature descriptions in this are perfect. The second one was Tom Outland's story, which is actually an excerpt from The Professor's House, which I've not yet read, and I thought it was fine. I had a lot of trouble getting into it. It's telling the story of this man who is with another man, and they end up discovering these artifacts on this mesa. And so it was beautifully written, but I just had a really hard time engaging with it. I was not invested in it. I didn't care about the characters very much. And I just had a hard time getting into it. I'd sit down and I'd be like, okay, like, I don't know. I really struggled with it. And I don't know, it may have been a me problem because I had some personal things going on that week that were really stressful. But yeah, so I'm continuing on with this into April, but I really liked one of them so far. I also finished The Return of the King. So I've now completed my reread of The Lord of the Rings. I read this through with my Patreon this year, and I was kind of wondering, I'm like, which book is going to be my favorite? I didn't know which one was going to be my favorite because The Two Towers is my favorite movie for nostalgic reasons. So I was kind of wondering if The Two Towers was going to be my favorite book. Having completed this, this is my favorite. There is so much beauty in this book as we're culminating to the end of everything that everyone has been working for, and there's so much hope that is like defiant in the face of evil, and like fighting for hope, fighting for joy, fighting for what's right. And then the fallout of everything that happens, like about 60% of the way through what we've been working through the whole time, it's culminated. And now we have 40% of the book left that's like the fallout of war. And there's so much bittersweetness in it. I really want to share some quotes, but I'm not going to because the ones that I love the most are pretty spoilery. But I just love it so much. As soon as I was done, I wanted to pick it up and start it again. I also started and finished Daniel Deronda, and I was really, really excited because this was my mammoth for March of the Mammoths, and I'm like, I'm going to be challenging myself to try to finish this in a month's time, but I did it. And as you can see by all the tabs, I really loved this one. I just did an in-depth vlog that has spoilery thoughts and non-spoilery thoughts in it, so if you're interested in that, you can go check that out. But oh my word, I loved this book. I love Eliot's writing. I think she's becoming a favorite writer of mine because her prose is just so perfect, so beautiful. The way that she describes human nature is incredible, and the way that she describes nature is incredible. And I just love how she takes characters and she makes them very flawed so they feel really real. They don't feel like they're super evil or super perfect. They feel real. And I just loved it so much. We follow Daniel Deronda, the title character, but we spend a good portion of the book also following Gwendolyn, a young girl, and kind of how their paths converge. They are like totally opposites, and it was just so interesting. I felt like Gwendolyn's story was much more dramatic and Daniel's was more philosophical and religious. So tonally kind of different, but they are brought together in like a really meaningful and beautiful way. And I thought the ending of this book absolutely made it perfect. That's what pushed it over to 5 stars for me, was the ending of this book. Up to that point, I'm like, I think this is probably going to be a very solid 4.5 star read. And then the ending was so perfect that it moved me to tears, and it was a 5 star. Well, those are the books that I've read in the month of March, plus a couple of outliers that I finished in February and just wanted a chance to talk about really quick. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. What did you read in March? What was your favorite book in March? And if you enjoyed or didn't enjoy, but have read any of the books that I talked about here, I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts and discuss with you in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.